Hey friends, it's RSKT. I recently uploaded a live looping performance that I made using the Synthstrom Deluge, and I wanted to take some time to walk you through how I went about setting up the track, setting up all of the looping sections, and just giving you a general overview of how everything was connected so that you could try something like this yourself. One quick note I forgot to mention while I was recording the video is that all of the sounds from that performance wound up getting processed through an audio effects rack in Ableton. So if you want to know how I go about setting something like that up, I have another video which I'll leave down below in the description. Sweet, let's not waste any more time and jump on in. So one other thing I want to mention real quick is that at the moment you're listening to this whole thing in mono, and that's because this is running into my audio interface where the other input is taken up by my mic so that I can do this voiceover. Now the main performance video was actually done this way as well, and I took the headphone out of my interface and put it into the input, the line input on the Deluge, so that way I could record my vocals into the Deluge. The only downside to that is that I wasn't able to record the performance back in stereo. Now, this could obviously be overcome by getting an XLR cable to a TSR adapter, and that way I could just plug the mic straight in. And I didn't really think about it until later, but one thing we could potentially explore is recording the whole performance directly into the Deluge, which means I could plug my mic straight in and not have to worry about recording stereo out into Ableton. I haven't tried that yet. It might be something to try in the future. Ultimately, if you wanted to go completely dualist with this, you would have your mic plugged in here and your stereo outs into something like a Zoom field recorder. And yeah, away you'd go. Okay, so here we are on the Synthstrom Deluge, and before we get stuck into having a look at how the track's broken down, I thought I'd just quickly point out that I actually went ahead and created the entire track, and then if I press load here, we can see I just called this one Shadows because I didn't have a title for it. If I scroll to the right here, we've got a version 2, which was a version for me to practice with, and then we have a version 3, which is the final version that you all heard in the YouTube video. So the fact that every time you press save, it asks you if you want to save incrementally or overwrite what you already have, it made it a lot easier for me to sort of try setting everything up, seeing how the song would actually sound, and then create a practice version where I remove parts so that I could live loop them later on. So let's just go into version 3, which is the track that all of you heard, and we'll start breaking it down piece by piece. So the first thing that you hear is this piano line. Let's go into this for a second and we'll have a look at how that track's made up. So this is one track that I live looped, but I previously sequenced it all together by adding in and removing notes at will. And that way I could just remove all of them when I was ready to sequence on the Novation Launch Key Mini. So let's have a look at how I made this sound. First up, we've got two oscillators that we're using. So oscillator 1 and oscillator 2, both set to the same level. If we go to the type, I'm using an analog saw wave and a standard saw wave. The first saw wave is not transposed at all, and the second one is transposed down an entire octave. I put a little bit of pulse width modulation on the second oscillator, and the slightest little bit of noise as well. After that, I set up the envelope so that there is a small amount of attack, a pretty fast decay, the same amount of sustain, and release is set to 30. So that way when I let go of a note, it'll still continue to ring out slightly. Now I have mapped the frequency to the first LFO only slightly, and that LFO is synced to 1 bar. So that way, as we go through the track, every bar, you'll hear that filter open up and close just slightly. Also have the frequency set to around 30%. So do you hear that moving? That wow. Yeah, I'm not a good LFO, but that's basically what the LFO is doing to the filter. think I also added on a tiny little bit of saturation. No decimation or bit crush. I always like to add just a little bit in there to help dirty up the sound a little bit. And also, as you introduce more elements, saturation can help make that original element stand out a little bit more so that it doesn't get lost within the track. So when it came time for me to perform this track back to you all, I just cleared all of the MIDI notes by holding down this select knob and pressing back or undo. That way it's cleared. And I have a Novation Launch Key Mini. Sorry if it's a little bit out of focus. Essentially, all you need to do is have it plugged into the Deluge, hold Learn and press one of the audition pads, and then touch one of these pads at the same time. The really handy part about doing it this way is that you can actually get a lot more control over your synth sounds. The Deluge pads are not velocity sensitive, whereas the keys on the Launch Key Mini are velocity sensitive. So let's undo that for now because I'm not going to perform it again. So underneath this one, let's toggle it on. We have this patch from Boards of Deluge 4, the fourth Boards of Deluge pack. I really like this one. It's beautiful. Listen. It's very quiet. It's very subtle. I think I played around with the filter slightly and might have introduced a little bit more noise as well. This one is just stacking up. So basically just playing the spaced chord, and then we just go up an octave as well. If we have a listen to it on its own. So together, these tracks really sound quite nice. I did wind up panning them ever so slightly to opposite sides. So the pad is panned slightly to the right and the piano is panned very slightly to the left. Going down from that, we have the bass. Let's actually solo this out. It's very basic. Excuse the pun. So this bass is actually a sample from the XOXO sample pack. I believe I already talked about that in my Making Complex Drum Rhythms with the Deluge, or whatever I called that video. It's essentially just a bass waveform. I haven't done anything that special to it other than drop the low pass filter very slightly and add in a tiny little bit of saturation. Without the saturation, it sounds like this, which I think might be enough to cut through on mobile, but adding a little bit more, because I know I'm going to post this to Instagram, a lot of Instagram listeners are on their mobiles. So I always add a little bit of saturation to the bass, just to add a little bit more harmonic richness to the high end, and that way it's easier to cut through on smaller speakers. And then the final synth element is this arpeggio down here. Now, by default, this track is actually on, but the level is dropped all the way. And that's because I knew that I didn't want it just coming in right at its peak sort of volume. I wanted to be able to fade it in slowly. So if we press play here, so I did try using the inbuilt arpeggio for this, but it was just going up and down in octaves and it didn't exactly play the notes that I wanted. So I sequenced it all in. So we're essentially just going up and down the scale. all the way towards the end, and then we just sort of come down and then jump right up to the top here. So this was all built using the internal synth engine as well. So we've got one oscillator, two oscillators turned up to 50. The first is a saw wave. The second is a triangle wave. The triangle wave is actually tuned down 2 whole octaves. The pulse width modulation is at around 30. And that's pretty much it for that. Then we have the frequency cutoff, which I've mapped to an LFO very slightly, just very minimal amount of LFO. So you can sort of hear that opening and closing, just like we did with the piano sound. Now you can hear it cutting off there a little bit in the release time. I could have used the release knob for this, and for some reason I just forgot that that even existed. So I actually mapped the envelope release to custom 2, and that way as it plays through, you'll see that it starts to close and then opens up again. And we can just control this however we want. So really basic, they're the 4 melodic tracks all playing together. Right, so let's have a look at some of these drum sounds. Now along the top, I have a sidechain track. It's basically just every count of the metronome, there is a sidechain playing. You can't hear it, of course. I just do this because I like a lot more control over my sidechain. The kick pattern is a little more complex than just 1, 2, 3, 4, and I don't want that triggering my sidechain for everything. So let's have a listen to the kick and snare. Now, really, this is just those 4 bars long. However, if you zoom out, I've duplicated it to 8 bars, and that was just so that while I was performing the track back, if I switched something on with the audition pad, it wouldn't accidentally play earlier than I wanted it to. Everything is pretty much set to be about 8 tracks, give or take 1 or 2. And that way everything always comes in at the right time when I'm performing it back. It's just a lot less to think about. So basically down here, these are all samples, again, from the XOXO sample pack from Samplified. I'll make sure to leave a link to that in the description. But basically we've got a kick. I've EQ'd a lot of these, by the way, in the Deluge, and played around with the filter a little bit, and I always add a little bit of saturation to a lot of my drum sounds as well. Kick, snare, the exact same snare above that, but pitched down a few cents. There's not much variation, but it's enough to make the snare sound slightly different every time it hits. And then we have these 3 percussive elements. So a lot of these sounds are set up with different probability, so they'll only play a set number of times or a set percentage of the time. And that just helps keep things fresh and interesting with a lot more variation thrown in. If you want a bit more of a walkthrough how to do this, I do have another video called Making Complex Drum Beats with the Synthstrom Deluge. I'll make sure that I'll leave a link to that below as well. After that, we have the hi-hat track. Pretty simple. Again, we've got the same hi-hat loaded in twice, but pitched down a few cents. Up, down, up, down, up, down, which is really good. And then we have an open hi-hat, which only plays a couple of times. It doesn't always play, and that way it just, again, throws in a little bit more variation, and there's a little bit of saturation on these as well. Underneath that, we have this percussive loop. Now, I've had this percussive loop sitting in Ableton for a while. I can't exactly remember where it's from, but I really like it. It's a cool little sort of glitchy sound and very metallic. I've thrown on a little bit of reverb and delay for this, and then I've panned a lot of these things left and right as well. So together it sounds like this. Great. And then we have this one final track, which is basically a drop and a build. So if we have a listen. And then towards the very end. So basically all it is a crash cymbal and a weird little glitchy drop. And then towards the end we have this sample. So these are very quiet, and I've thrown in a little bit of reverb, delay, saturation, and high pass filtered them just so that they're kind of in the background, but they're there enough to bring a little bit more tension and release to different parts of the track as they come in and out. Now let's talk about the vocal tracks down here. So essentially the way this is set up is I recorded a vocal track that was 8 bars long, and then I played around with some of the chorus effects and reverb and delay and filter just to get my vocals sounding the way that I wanted. And then what you can do is, just like how we cleared the middle track earlier, we can hold this and press back or undo, and it will clear all of the audio that you've already recorded into that track. So it's almost like setting up a dummy track for your audio recordings. And then if I hold shift and record, you'll see that we can toggle between red, flashing, or purple. If it's set to purple, that means when we record something underneath it, it's going to continuously overdub. At the moment, we have these 2 vocal tracks that I've already recorded, and I'm sorry in advance that you have to listen to these solo. So let's delete these 2. We'll leave the piano melody and the drums playing. Now, you're not going to hear anything at the moment. I don't have a microphone plugged in, so maybe we'll just use the internal mic on the Deluge. We'll hold learn, input, and just set it to stereo or balanced. Great. And now if I hold record and press underneath this row, we'll be able to record an audio track. Once this gets to the end of its bar, we'll press record on this lane. One, two, three, 4. Now you'll see that at the moment we have this audio recording in here, and then if we hold record again and press the row underneath it, once it gets to the end of this section, it's going to stop recording and link into the next bar. Alright, and now we can hear the original recording very quietly playing, and we can see that this new lane is being recorded down the bottom. We'll let that go through. I'm just going to continue talking so that we can at least see that there's some audio playing there. Blah blah blah. Almost done. And then we can hit record. Great. And now we have these 2 audio lines that are set up the exact same way that this track was set up. Let me just quickly turn off monitoring for this lane. Now we have these 2 audio tracks set up, and you can either fiddle around with these afterwards or at least know that they're going to follow the same effects routing that you set up on this original dummy track. We have this audio here. Fantastic. Great. So I think that pretty much covers just about everything. And Again, all we're doing is clearing this first piano track like this, making sure that nothing else is turned on at the time except for this other backing track, pressing record. As soon as we press record again, absolutely music to my ears. Anyways, so of course you want to get your timing right and everything like that, but we could record and then start launching all of our other clips, mute them when the time came for it, and pretty much record our vocal tracks, and then do the same process again, bring clips in, move clips out, and eventually fade it all down to nothing. So that's it from me today, everybody. I'm really liking producing music on this thing. I think it's a hell of a lot of fun, and I hope that some of my content has been inspiring to some of you. If you have any comments or questions or feedback, please leave them down below in the description, and I'll be sure to try and get back to you. Finally, if you make something like this yourself, find a way to share it with me, either on Instagram or Facebook, or even shoot me an email. I'd love to see what you come up with. Hit the like if you like, and if you don't, tell me why. Please subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.